I started $1 million company from a Craigslist ad and almost lost it all over a $19 mistake. Here's what happened. Back in 2016, I was 26, broke, and sleeping in a friend's basement in Denver. I had left a decent job in corporate marketing after realizing I hated the meetings, the jargon, and the fact that I was making other people rich. I told myself I wanted to be my own boss, but the truth was I had no idea what I was doing. I had a liberal arts degree, $4,000 in savings, and no business plan. One morning, while scrolling Craigslist for part-time gigs, I saw an ad. Moving help needed. $19/HR truck provided. I thought, hell, I have muscles. Why not? I showed up at a random apartment complex to help a guy move his studio apartment. It took 4 hours. At the end, he handed me $80 in cash, thanked me, and said, "You're way better than the last guy I hired." That stuck with me. Better than the last guy. That night, I wondered, how bad are these other movers? A few Google searches later, and I realized the bar was low. Lots of shady companies, bad websites, horrible reviews. I thought maybe there was an opening here. I went back on Craigslist, made my own ad. Reliable moving help. Fast, careful, and on time. $50/HR. No company name. No business license. Just a burner phone and a Gmail account. I used a free Google Voice number so I could sound more professional. I got 2 calls within the first week. The first job paid $150. I recruited a buddy from high school and split it with him. The second paid $220. The third, $300. Word spread fast. We started wearing matching blue t-shirts with "Reliable Movers" stenciled in Sharpie. We weren't insured. We weren't even legal. But people loved us because we showed up on time, didn't steal anything, and smiled. By month 2, I'd made more in a few weeks than I ever had at my desk job. So I decided to get serious. I filed an LLC. Bought a used cargo van off Craigslist for $200. Paid $600 for a legit logo and slapped it on magnets for the van. Made a simple website with Squarespace and started running $5/day ads on Facebook. The name? Quick Lift Moving Company. My logic was that it sounded strong, dependable, and just a little bit techy. Business boomed. By the end of that summer, we were doing 3 to 5 jobs a week. I had 4 guys working for me, all under the table but trustworthy. I rented a tiny storage space to keep supplies. I started offering packing services. By 2017, I hit $100K in revenue. I hired my girlfriend to run the phones. I bought a second van. Then, things got messy. One of my employees, let's call him Mike, got into a shouting match with a customer. It got bad. There were accusations of damage, some screaming, and eventually a scathing Yelp review. I called to apologize and offered a full refund. The woman refused and instead reported us to the Better Business Bureau. That's when I realized I couldn't wing it anymore. I hired a lawyer, got proper insurance, moved everyone to 1099 contracts, and started using a CRM system to track jobs. I raised prices. I streamlined our operations. I watched YouTube videos on how to lead a morning stand-up. I devoured business books. I was slowly turning from hustler to owner. By 2019, we were doing $400K/year in revenue. We had 6 trucks, 12 part-time movers, and a 4.9-star Google rating. I got featured in a local paper and people started calling us the Uber of moving, which was both flattering and wildly inaccurate. Then came the $19 mistake. It was a rainy Tuesday in March 2020. One of my dispatchers entered the wrong address into our job system. A woman had booked a move for 9 a.m. at 1910 Franklin Street. My guy typed in 1900 Franklin Boulevard, which was 45 minutes away. The crew showed up late. The customer flipped. Not only that, but we had another job booked immediately after, and the delay messed everything up. We had to reschedule the second customer, who also left a 1-star review. Both people demanded refunds. One even threatened to sue because of emotional stress. Over a $19/hour difference between the booking rates and what was charged due to an input error. I lost $1,300 that day, but worse, I felt the crack forming in my professional armor. That night, I stared at our calendar. We had 28 jobs booked that month. Each one was a potential landmine. I needed systems. Real systems. not just hope and hustle. So I invested in actual software, scheduling tools, GPS tracking, automated reminders. I paid for a QA consultant to review our customer experience. I created a checklist for every move. I trained my team like a boot camp. COVID hit. And surprisingly, we thrived. People were still moving, some because of job loss, others for more space. We masked up, sanitized, and leaned hard into our reputation for reliability. By the end of 2020, we hit $980K in revenue. I paid myself a salary for the first time. $65,000. Not much, but it felt earned. In 2021, we crossed $1.2 million. I hired a real operations manager. I moved into a small office with a garage bay. I finally stopped driving the trucks myself. But here's the thing no one tells you about success. It's quiet. There's no parade. No fireworks. Just fewer fires and more spreadsheets. Now it's 2025. We're at $1.9 million in revenue, 22 employees, and we're expanding to a second city. I still think about that Craigslist ad sometimes. How it was just a lifeline on a bad day that turned into a calling. And I still check every single job address before the trucks roll out. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. My journey into entrepreneurship didn't start with a genius idea or a dream to change the world. It started with resentment. Resentment at my job, my boss, my stagnant salary, and the gnawing realization that I was helping someone else get rich while my bank account hovered around overdraft. I was 28, working in logistics at a mid-sized e-commerce company. It was one of those open office startups with kombucha on tap, but behind the scenes, it was chaos. I managed warehouse coordination, delivery optimization, and returns. The hours were brutal and the appreciation minimal. After a particularly bad quarter, management decided to cut bonuses across the board, except for the executive team. That was my breaking point. I didn't quit right away. I'm not that reckless. But I started plotting my exit. I didn't have a brilliant product or a million-dollar idea, just years of inside knowledge about how e-commerce operations actually work, and, more importantly, where most businesses screw it up. That's how the idea for my company was born. I noticed that a ton of small and medium e-commerce stores had no idea how to handle returns. They either ignored them, mishandled them, or lost money trying to process them. I thought, what if I created a third-party returns management service? One that made returns painless for both the customer and the business? I called it Loopback. It was literally just me and a rented storage unit for the first 3 months. I set up a basic website and posted on a few Shopify forums offering my service. I charged per return processed, plus a monthly retainer. The pitch was simple. We handle your returns, restocking, and refunds, and you focus on sales. At first, nothing. Then a small clothing brand in Portland reached out. They were doing about $60K a month in sales, but drowning in returns. I onboarded them manually, no integrations, no fancy dashboard, just Google Sheets, email, and me physically inspecting each returned item. It worked. Within a month, they saw faster returns, better customer feedback, and fewer chargebacks. They posted about it on a Shopify Facebook group, and suddenly, I had 5 new clients. By month 6, I was doing enough revenue to quit my job. Not profit, revenue. Profit was a joke at that point. I was working 16-hour days, dealing with everything from mislabeled packages to angry customers accusing us of stealing their shoes. I made about $2,000 that month after expenses, but it felt like $20,000 because it was mine. The first big challenge came at month 9, when I realized my current setup wouldn't scale. I was personally handling about 150 returns a week. My storage unit was bursting at the seams. I hired my first employee, a guy named Rico who used to work with me in logistics. He was smart, reliable, and unemployed. I offered him $18/hour and a promise, if this thing worked, he'd get a piece. We moved into a 1,200 square foot warehouse. I bought racks, a barcode scanner, and a used van. Suddenly, we looked like a real business. That illusion helped land our first $10K/month client, a DTC sneaker brand that needed return handling across the West Coast. We built custom workflows for them, tracked return reasons, and even suggested product tweaks based on return data. That became our edge. We weren't just processing returns, we were turning them into insights. Year 1 ended with $214K in revenue and maybe $12K in actual profit. I paid myself $2,000 a month and reinvested everything else. It was grueling, but I felt alive for the first time in years. Year 2 was when things exploded. Word of mouth was strong, and our name kept popping up in private Slack groups and Shopify circles. We added integrations with Shopify and WooCommerce, automated our intake process, and built a basic client dashboard with a freelance developer. I started pitching VCs, badly at first. Most passed. Too niche. Too operationally heavy. Not sexy. One investor told me it's a logistics business pretending to be SaaS. I smiled and said, yes. And logistics run the world. Eventually, I found a small seed fund that got it. They gave us $350K on a safe note. That let me hire a full-time developer, a customer success lead, and rent a second warehouse in Chicago. We were now handling over 1,200 returns per week. There were low points. One time a client accused us of reselling their returned items without permission. We weren't. Another time, our Chicago warehouse flooded and we lost 2 pallets of returns. I personally drove overnight to help clean up the mess. But we pushed through. We developed standardized SOPs, built a lightweight internal tool to track returns from intake to resolution, and started offering instant credit to shoppers for approved returns, which drove up repurchases for our clients by over 15%. By year 3, we were processing over 60,000 returns annually, serving 75-plus e-commerce brands, and doing just over $1.9 million in revenue. We were profitable. Barely, but we were. I started paying myself a decent salary, finally moved out of my tiny apartment, and even took a weekend off, my first in almost 2 years. Last year, we closed a $2.5M Series A. It still feels surreal. The round was led by a logistics-focused VC that loved our operational discipline. We used the money to expand to the East Coast, hire a head of ops, and finally build a scalable SaaS layer that plugs into our physical infrastructure. Today, Loopback handles returns for over 120 brands. We're not flashy. We don't have an app that changes the world. But we solve a painful, expensive problem that most people ignore. And we do it well. If you're reading this thinking you need a big idea to start something, you don't. You just need a problem that pisses you off enough to want to fix it. And the patience to fix it one step at a time. Entrepreneurship isn't glamorous. Most of the time, it's just really hard work for longer than anyone tells you. But if you keep going, there's a point where the grind turns into growth, and the hustle becomes a company. And that's when it starts to get really fun. I remember the first day I decided to leave my 9-to-5 job. It wasn't a glamorous moment. No dramatic speeches or life-changing epiphanies. It was more of a slow burn, like watching a pot of water boil without realizing it's been on the stove too long. I'd been working as a project manager for a mid-sized tech company for over 5 years. I had a steady paycheck, benefits, and the security that most people dream of, but I felt like I was stuck. The work was mind-numbing, the politics were draining, and I didn't feel like I was living. I was just existing. It all started when I got an idea. It wasn't anything grand or revolutionary, but it was mine. I was at my desk one day, mindlessly clicking through emails when I noticed something odd. A lot of my colleagues were struggling with the same issue I had struggled with in the past, staying organized and on top of deadlines. I had come up with a system that worked for me years ago, something simple but effective. I began thinking, what if I could create an app that would help people like me? The idea of creating an app wasn't new. There were hundreds of project management tools out there, but they were either too complex or not intuitive enough for people like my colleagues. People who didn't need a full-fledged enterprise tool, but just something simple to keep track of their day-to-day tasks. That was the gap I wanted to fill. I started to research, looking at every tool out there. I spoke to people in the industry, read articles, and watched YouTube videos about app development. The more I learned, the more I felt this pull. I had to do something with this idea. But then reality hit. I had no experience in coding or app development. I didn't know anything about running a business or marketing a product. I had a full-time job, a mortgage, and bills to pay. The idea of quitting my job and diving into the unknown was terrifying. And yet, There was this voice in my head that wouldn't let me go back to my old routine. I had to try. I spent nights researching how to build an app. I learned the basics of coding through free resources, trying to build my app from scratch. It wasn't pretty at first. My first prototype was a clunky, buggy mess. It looked like something a 10-year-old would design, but I didn't care. It worked, and that's all I needed to get started. I reached out to a couple of freelance developers to help me refine it. They were skeptical at first. "You want to build what?" one said. But after seeing the initial prototype and hearing my vision, they agreed to join me. The next few months were a blur. I was still working my full-time job, but every free moment was dedicated to the app. I spent my weekends coding, brainstorming, and designing. My evenings were filled with meetings with my small team of freelancers. The work wasn't glamorous. There were late nights and frustration. Many times, I wanted to quit. But something kept me going. The belief that I could create something that would help others and finally escape the life I was living. By the time the app was ready for beta testing, I was at a breaking point. I was tired, worn out, and didn't know how much longer I could juggle both my job and the business. My friends and family were starting to notice the toll it was taking on me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd taken a proper break. But then, the first beta testers started to give me feedback. Some of it was tough, but a lot of it was positive. People were using my app to get organized, and it was working. That's when I knew this could actually be something. Still, I was scared. I had no idea how to market the app, how to get people to notice it in the sea of other apps out there. I couldn't afford to spend thousands on advertising. So I started small. I reached out to people in my network, offered free trials, and asked them to share their experiences. I leveraged social media, posting updates and behind-the-scenes glimpses of the app's development. Slowly but surely, people started downloading it, using it, and talking about it. It was a slow burn, but it was happening. The turning point came about a year after I had started the project. I had made enough progress with the app that I could see a future for it, but I was still in a rut. My 9-to-5 job was demanding more of my time, and I felt like I was at a crossroads. I could keep grinding away at my job, secure in the knowledge that I had a steady paycheck, or I could take the leap and go all in on the app. I spoke to my partner about it, and after a long discussion, I made the decision to leave my job. It wasn't an easy choice. It felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing what was at the bottom. But I knew I had to take that leap if I wanted to see if this dream could become a reality. The first few months after quitting were rough. I didn't have the financial cushion that some entrepreneurs have, so every decision had to be carefully thought out. I worked from my small apartment, living off savings and income from the app. I continued to make improvements based on feedback from users, focusing on making the app more user-friendly and reliable. And then, something unexpected happened. My app started to go viral. It wasn't anything I had planned for, but somehow, people started sharing it more, and the download spiked. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a real business. Fast forward 3 years, and my app has over 500,000 active users. I've built a small but dedicated team, and the business is profitable. I'm no longer working out of my apartment. I have a small office now, and I get to work on something I'm passionate about every day. It hasn't been easy. There have been setbacks, tough decisions, and plenty of moments when I doubted myself. But the journey has been worth it. Looking back, I realized that the most important part of the process wasn't the success of the app itself, but the decision to believe in myself and take the first step, even when I had no idea where it would lead. I guess the lesson here is simple. Sometimes, the best things in life come from the scariest decisions. If I had stayed in my safe job, I would have never known what I was capable of. But by taking a risk and following my passion, I found something that gives me purpose and fulfillment. It's not always smooth sailing, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. So if you're thinking about taking that leap, whether it's starting a business, switching careers, or pursuing something you love, just know that it's okay to be scared. It's okay to not have everything figured out. Just take that first step, and the rest will follow. The journey may be long, but it's worth it in the end. So, here's the story of how I built a business from scratch with barely anything to my name, and ended up building $1 million company in less than 5 years. It's one of those, I had no idea what I was doing but figured it out kind of stories, and it took a lot of grit, mistakes, and sleepless nights to get here. It all started in 2018. I was 25, living in a small, rundown apartment with my childhood best friend. We had both moved to the city to try and find our way, and we had nothing but big dreams. I was working at a corporate job, doing marketing for a mid-sized company. It wasn't the worst job, but I hated it. Every day felt like I was just going through the motions, and I was making good money, but I wasn't happy. I was constantly thinking about how I could get out and do something on my own. One night, I was scrolling through Instagram when I stumbled across a small clothing brand that was blowing up. The brand was barely a year old, yet they were getting all this attention. I was amazed at how they were able to build a huge online following with seemingly nothing. I started researching how they did it, and honestly, the more I dug, the more obsessed I became with the idea of starting my own brand. But I didn't know the first thing about making clothes or selling them. My best friend, let's call him Sam, was always the one to encourage me to go after things. He was a bit of a dreamer too, and we both had this idea that we could create something out of nothing. We decided to give it a go. We didn't have a lot of money to work with, so the idea was to bootstrap everything. I took out a personal loan for $5,000, and we decided to put everything we had into creating our first product, a t-shirt. Simple, but we figured if we could sell a few, we could reinvest into something bigger. Neither of us had any experience in fashion, so we started watching YouTube videos on how to design and create t-shirts. We learned about fabric, printing techniques, and how to set up an online store. After a few weeks of trial and error, we finally settled on a design we liked. We found a supplier who could make the shirts for us in small batches. I used my marketing knowledge to set up a basic Shopify store, and Sam helped with the branding. We spent countless hours perfecting everything, from the website to the social media strategy. We knew we needed to create hype before we launched, so we began posting teasers on Instagram and Facebook. The first few days of launching, I was so excited. We put up ads on Instagram and Facebook, targeting people who liked similar brands. We even sent out some free shirts to influencers hoping to get some traction. To be honest, I didn't expect much at first, but a few days later, something amazing happened. People started buying. Slowly at first, but then it started picking up. We weren't making a fortune by any means, but we were making sales. It was proof that people were interested in what we had to offer. At that point, we were working 16-hour days, trying to keep up with orders. I was still working my corporate job during the day, and Sam was handling all the shipping and customer service. After work, we'd meet up at my apartment and spend hours designing new products, updating our website, and trying to learn more about digital marketing. A few months in, we realized that we were doing something right. But we also realized that we needed to be smarter if we wanted to grow. We had to figure out how to scale the business without completely burning out. The first major breakthrough came when we started working with influencers. We'd always been a little hesitant about paying influencers because we didn't have much money to begin with. But after seeing the results from the free products we sent out, we decided to reach out to a few larger influencers in our niche and offer them payment for sponsored posts. We started small with micro-influencers, people who had a few thousand followers but engaged regularly with their audience. We didn't have the budget for the big-name influencers, but the smaller ones turned out to be much more effective for our brand. This led to an explosion in sales. It wasn't immediate, but over the course of several months, our social media following grew exponentially. I started focusing all my energy on marketing. I learned everything I could about Facebook ads, Google ads, and SEO. I even took a few online courses to get better at it. We started collaborating with more influencers, running flash sales, and releasing limited edition products. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, and people began tagging their friends on social media, which helped us expand our reach. By 2019, we had moved into a small warehouse. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a huge step up from our tiny apartment. We had about 10 employees by this point, including a designer, a few customer service reps, and a warehouse manager. Sam and I still did a lot of the heavy lifting, but we were finally starting to see the fruits of our labor. The next phase of growth came when we started diversifying our product line. We had initially just focused on t-shirts, but we knew that wasn't enough to sustain the growth we wanted. We launched hoodies, hats, and accessories. I was really nervous at first because I wasn't sure if people would buy these new products, but the demand was overwhelming. We sold out of our first hoodie drop in less than 24 hours, and that was when I knew we were on to something bigger. By 2020, we had built a solid brand and were doing 6 figures in revenue. The growth was insane. I was able to quit my corporate job and focus full-time on the business. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. We had to deal with supply chain issues, shipping delays, and managing customer expectations, especially as we scaled. It was stressful, and there were many times I thought we might fail, but we pushed through. Fast forward to 2023, and our company is now generating over $10 million in annual revenue. We have a team of over 50 employees and a product line that includes everything from clothing to accessories. We've worked with some of the biggest names in the influencer world, and we've even had our products featured in a few magazines. Looking back, I'm still amazed at how far we've come. There were so many times I wanted to quit, but we kept pushing through, one small step at a time. I think the biggest lesson I learned is that success isn't an overnight thing. It's about consistency, perseverance, and knowing when to pivot. I'd be lying if I said it was easy, but there's nothing like the feeling of knowing you built something from nothing. And now, I get to wake up every day and do what I love. The hustle never stops, but it's worth every sleepless night. I want to share the journey of how I built my tech company from scratch, struggling with doubts and setbacks, but also learning valuable lessons that changed everything for me. It all started in 2016. I had just graduated with a degree in computer science, and like many recent grads, I was overwhelmed by the uncertainty of what to do next. I had spent the last few years buried in books, coding assignments, and exams, but the real world felt completely different. My friends were either entering the job market or going for their masters, while I felt this deep, gnawing urge to do something on my own. At the time, it didn't even matter what exactly. I just knew I didn't want to sit behind a desk doing code for someone else. But reality hit me hard. I didn't have much money saved, I wasn't living in a tech hub like Silicon Valley, and I had no idea how to run a business. The idea of starting a tech company seemed impossible. The closest thing I had to experience was working on a couple of open-source projects during college. I was also constantly hearing stories about how difficult it was to get funding, how many startups failed, and how incredibly competitive the space was. Despite all that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to try. So I did what any desperate young grad would do. I Googled how to start a tech company and started absorbing everything I could find. There were so many resources, blogs, podcasts, and success stories out there, and it got me motivated. I started thinking about my skill set and where I could add value. That's when the idea for my product came to me. I had always been frustrated with how difficult it was to track and analyze my personal finances. Sure, there were apps like Mint or Inab, you need a budget, but none of them felt intuitive or personal enough. They were too broad, too impersonal. I wanted something that would help me understand my spending habits, offer real-time insights, and suggest ways to save money, all without having to sift through a sea of graphs and numbers. I wasn't a financial expert, but I knew I could build the tech. After a few months of late-night brainstorming and working on the concept, I designed a simple prototype of a personal finance app that would not only categorize transactions, but also predict future expenses and give users personalized tips based on their habits. Now, this is where the true entrepreneurial struggle began. I had a basic app, but no business model, no idea how to market it, and no money to build a team. I didn't even know where to begin with fundraising or getting investors on board. I had a vision, but it felt like an uphill battle every single day. I started networking, attending startup meetups, and pitching my idea to anyone who would listen. I quickly learned that investors weren't interested in me because I didn't have a proven track record. Even people who seemed genuinely interested would eventually back off when they realized I had no team or resources. It was discouraging. I took a job as a junior developer at a local company just to keep myself afloat. During the day, I worked on building out the app during my spare time. Even though the job wasn't related to my startup, it helped me cover living expenses and gave me the financial stability I needed to continue working on the project. I spent weekends coding, researching user experience design, and working on my pitch deck. It wasn't glamorous, but it was necessary. In the meantime, my app slowly started to take shape. The first breakthrough came after about a year when I met a fellow developer at a meetup who was also passionate about personal finance. His name was Mark. We exchanged ideas and frustrations about the current market, and I was surprised at how much he believed in my app. He told me he had been thinking of building something similar for years, but didn't have the time or resources. After some discussions, Mark became my first co-founder. We agreed to split everything 50-50, and he helped me refine the app's functionality and add features like automatic bill reminders, recurring payments tracking, and credit score monitoring. With Mark's help, I felt like the product was starting to become something people would actually want to use. But we were still far from ready for launch. The next hurdle was finding a way to generate revenue. Without a clear revenue stream, we'd never be able to sustain the business. We experimented with several models, from one-time app purchases to subscription services. After a lot of trial and error, we landed on a freemium model. The app would be free to use, but users could pay for premium features, such as deeper financial analytics and integrations with other accounts. We didn't have the money to pay for marketing, so we relied heavily on word of mouth. I started reaching out to finance bloggers and influencers who had a following and asking if they'd be willing to review our app. Some ignored me, some responded politely but said no, and a few actually agreed to check it out. Slowly, user numbers began to grow, but there were still plenty of issues to deal with. At this stage, we had no office space, no proper legal protection, and no clear idea of how we'd scale. Mark and I were working out of our apartments, crashing on couches during late-night coding sessions, and struggling to stay afloat. Despite all the progress, we were still barely breaking even. But one thing kept us going: customer feedback. Users started reaching out to us with suggestions, some of which were pure gold. They wanted us to improve the budgeting tool, add a feature for savings goals, and integrate with more banks. Every time we made a change based on feedback, the app became more refined. We even received messages from people saying how our app had helped them get their finances in order, and that was the most fulfilling part of the whole process. The thought that we were actually helping people was enough to fuel us through the sleepless nights. Eventually, we managed to secure a small seed investment from an angel investor who liked our vision. This gave us the financial cushion we needed to focus full-time on the company. With that investment, we were able to hire a few more developers and a product manager, which allowed us to scale the app faster. Fast forward to today, and our company is now profitable and growing. We have a small but dedicated team, and we're continuously improving the product. Our app has been featured in a few big publications, and we've even expanded into offering financial consulting services. It's been a tough journey, filled with countless failures, doubts, and moments where I thought about quitting, but looking back, I wouldn't change a thing. If there's one thing I've learned through this entire experience, it's that entrepreneurship isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning to get back up every time you fall. No matter how many obstacles or rejections you face, as long as you keep pushing forward, there's always a chance that you'll succeed. And that success, when it comes, is even sweeter because of the struggle that preceded it. My entrepreneurial journey started back in 2016 when I was in my mid-20s and absolutely clueless about business. I had a college degree, some decent internships under my belt, and a mountain of student loan debt hanging over me. But there was always this nagging feeling that I was meant for something different than the traditional 9 to 5 grind. At that time, I was working as a marketing assistant for a small but growing e-commerce company, doing what I thought was my dream job. But I was uninspired and frustrated. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was merely a cog in a machine, not truly contributing to something I could be proud of. So, after about a year of this, I decided to take a risk. I was living in a small apartment with a roommate, barely making enough to cover my bills, but I had this idea. I had always been passionate about fitness, specifically about high-quality, performance-based supplements. As someone who had been training for years and saw the difference that clean, well-made products made to my performance, I wanted to create something that stood out in a crowded market. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how saturated the fitness supplement industry was. Yet, the products that promised results were often poorly formulated, filled with additives, or sold by brands that didn't seem to care much about quality. So, I began planning what would eventually become my first business, a supplement company that focused on clean, high-quality ingredients and no-nonsense formulations. At first, I had no idea where to begin. I didn't have money to hire experts or consultants, and frankly, I didn't even know how to formulate supplements. But I was determined, and I started reading. Books, blogs, podcasts, you name it. I spent countless hours learning about the supplement industry, product formulation, the manufacturing process, and marketing strategies. I connected with suppliers, labs, and even nutritionists who could guide me along the way. One of the most challenging parts was finding the right manufacturer. I had no experience, and I was nervous about getting scammed or partnering with a company that didn't care about quality. After months of searching and vetting, I found a lab that was willing to work with a small startup like mine. I took a leap of faith, using the last of my savings to create my first product, a pre-workout supplement. I remember the excitement and anxiety I felt when the first batch arrived at my apartment. The product was real. It was tangible. And for the first time in months, I felt like I was working on something that mattered. From there, I built a website, created branding, and slowly started putting my product out there. Initially, I didn't have much of a budget for marketing, so I relied on word of mouth and social media. I started posting about fitness on Instagram and Facebook, offering honest reviews of my own product and giving away samples to people who were genuinely interested. Slowly, I started to see traction. Orders came in, and people started talking about my product online. However, I soon realized that building a brand wasn't as easy as I'd thought. I didn't know what I didn't know. I spent a lot of time and energy trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. And at times, it felt like I was just throwing money into a pit. The first major setback came when I ran out of stock just a few months after launch. I didn't anticipate demand to be that high, and I was caught off guard. It was a stressful time because I had put everything into this venture, and now I had to figure out how to scale production without running into cash flow issues. I took out a small business loan, sold some personal items, and borrowed from family to keep the business alive. The pressure was immense, and there were days when I wasn't sure I would make it through. But I persevered, learning from every mistake and adjusting my strategy. I launched a referral program to encourage my customers to spread the word, and I worked on improving my website's user experience to make purchasing as seamless as possible. Gradually, sales picked up, and I started to see real growth. By the end of year one, I had made a modest profit. It wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough to cover my costs and keep the business afloat. In year two, I focused on refining the product line and expanding my offerings. I added a protein powder and a post-workout recovery supplement to the lineup. But the real game changer came when I decided to reach out to fitness influencers for partnerships. I wasn't looking for celebrities, but rather micro-influencers with dedicated, niche followings. The response was overwhelming. These influencers didn't just promote my products, they genuinely believed in what I was creating. Their endorsement made a huge difference, and my sales exploded. That year was a blur. I hired my first employee, a social media manager, and moved into a small warehouse space. The challenges were different now: supply chain issues, managing inventory, customer service, but at least the business was growing. The turning point came when I realized that I needed to start thinking bigger. I couldn't keep running everything myself. I had to take the next step toward professionalizing the business if I wanted to scale. So, in 2019, I made the decision to seek out outside investment. This was a nerve-wracking process, and it took months of pitching, rejections, and refining my business plan. But finally, I found an angel investor who believed in my vision and was willing to help take the company to the next level. With this new influx of capital, I was able to invest in new product lines, hire a more experienced team, and expand my marketing efforts. I also diversified into brick-and-mortar retail by partnering with a chain of health stores. The next few years were a whirlwind of growth and opportunity. By 2021, my supplement brand had hit 7 figures in revenue, and I was starting to see the fruits of all the hard work. But success came with its own set of challenges. We had to constantly innovate to stay ahead of competitors, manage a growing team, and navigate the complexities of running a larger business. There were days when I felt overwhelmed, but I reminded myself that the struggle was part of the journey. Today, I'm proud of what my company has become. We're not just a supplement brand. We're a community of people who care about fitness, health, and wellness. We've expanded our product line even further, built strong relationships with athletes and trainers, and created a loyal customer base. I'm no longer working from my apartment. I have a beautiful office and a team of 50-plus employees. The financial strain I once felt has been replaced with the excitement of opportunity, but I never forget where I came from. The journey wasn't easy, and I still have a lot to learn, but I'm proud of the business I've built and the lessons I've learned along the way. I've learned that entrepreneurship is a roller coaster. It's a game of resilience, learning, and adapting. There are no guarantees, but with hard work, determination, and a bit of luck, it's possible to turn an idea into a thriving business. And even on the tough days, when I'm faced with challenges, I always remind myself, this is the life I chose, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. I started my entrepreneurial journey at 24, fresh out of college with a mountain of student debt and a degree that was, to put it bluntly, only half useful. I had studied business administration, but what they don't teach you in school is how little that degree is worth when you're staring down the real world, realizing you're competing with thousands of others who had the same piece of paper. At the time, I was working a dead-end job at a marketing agency in the city, doing client reports and making next to nothing. The hours were long and the work was dull. But the biggest frustration wasn't just the work itself, it was the lack of control. I was working for someone else's vision, and while it paid the bills, it didn't feed my ambition. I kept reading about successful entrepreneurs, how they were able to build something from nothing, and I became obsessed with the idea that I could do the same. One night, after a particularly soul-sucking day at work, I found myself scrolling through Reddit, reading the success stories of people who had started businesses and scaled them. There was one post in particular that stuck with me. A guy in his 30s had built a multi-million-dollar business out of a tiny idea he'd had while working a similar desk job. That was it. The spark was lit. I spent the next few weeks researching everything I could about entrepreneurship. I devoured books, podcasts, and blogs. I followed people like Tim Ferriss and Gary Vaynerchuk. Slowly but surely, the pieces started to come together. The more I learned, the more I realized that, while there was no guarantee of success, there was a roadmap. I could follow it. I could be one of those stories. But how? What could I build? The idea didn't come to me immediately. I knew I had a passion for technology, but I didn't want to jump into a saturated field like software development or app creation without a solid plan. I needed something different, something that would set me apart. Then, one night, while talking with a friend over beers, the idea hit me. What if I could create a service that helped small businesses automate their social media marketing? At that time, social media was growing exponentially, and small business owners were struggling to keep up. They knew they needed an online presence, but they didn't know how to create consistent, engaging content, and many of them couldn't afford expensive agencies. I pitched the idea to my friend, who was a small business owner himself, and he immediately saw the value. That was when I knew I was onto something. I'd find a way to automate social media management for small businesses in a way that was affordable, scalable, and user-friendly. The catch was I had no technical skills at all. So, I did what anyone would do in my position. I outsourced. I found a freelance developer on Upwork who had experience with building SaaS platforms, and we started talking. I explained my vision to him, and, after a couple of discussions, we agreed on terms. I scraped together every penny I could, throwing all of it into the initial development of the platform. I still remember the feeling when I wired that first payment. It felt like such a huge leap, but also the scariest decision of my life. The first version of the platform was minimal. It didn't do much, just automated basic post scheduling and provided some templates for social media posts. But it was enough to get started. The next step was marketing. I didn't have much of a budget, so I turned to content marketing, which I had read so much about. I started a blog and wrote posts that provided value to small business owners. I created free guides, shared tips on social media, and started building an email list. Slowly, the traffic started to come in. But even though we had a product and some early interest, we weren't making money. The truth was, we had all the pieces in place, but I didn't know how to sell. I had no experience with sales, and our platform wasn't fully developed yet. The first few months were frustrating. I spent a ton of time tweaking the product and marketing it, but very few people were actually signing up for the service. At the time, I felt like I was failing. The pressure was building, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pushing before I had to throw in the towel. I had sunk so much time and money into this idea that I started questioning if I was deluding myself. I would stay up late researching sales strategies, trying to figure out how I could make the product work. Then, in one of those rare moments of clarity that you only get after months of stress, I realized that the issue wasn't the product, it was the marketing. The key to getting more customers was in reaching the right people at the right time. So, I doubled down on Facebook ads. I ran very targeted campaigns aimed at small business owners, and I spent a lot of time fine-tuning the messaging. And it worked. Suddenly, people started signing up. Our first few paying customers felt like a huge win. They were small, but they were paying, and that was enough to prove the concept. We continued to build on the platform, adding new features like analytics, more templates, and integrations with other tools like email marketing services. With every new feature, we launched more campaigns to drum up interest, and each time, our customer base grew. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up, moments when I felt completely out of my depth. But every time I felt like I was failing, I found a new way to push forward. I listened to feedback from users, iterated on the product, and continued to learn. Over the next few years, our little startup went from a side project to a fully fledged business with a team of 6 people, and our customer base exploded. The business continued to grow, and with it, my confidence. The fear that had once held me back slowly disappeared, replaced by a sense of control. I had done it. I had built something from the ground up, and it was working. We eventually expanded into new markets, bringing on bigger clients and offering more advanced features for larger businesses. But I'll always remember the early days, the late nights, the struggles, the self-doubt, and how those moments helped shape the entrepreneur I became. I learned a lot from that experience. Building a business isn't about finding a perfect idea or a smooth path. It's about persistence, resilience, and a willingness to keep learning. And as much as I look back at those years with nostalgia, I know the journey isn't over. There are always new challenges ahead, and that's what makes entrepreneurship so exciting. So, if you're sitting there wondering if you should take the leap, do it. It's hard, it's scary, and you'll fail more times than you'll succeed. But it's worth it. There's nothing like the feeling of seeing your hard work come to life. And even when it seems impossible, just remember, it's not the idea that matters most. It's your ability to keep going. Let me take you back to the moment when I started my journey as an entrepreneur. It wasn't the glamorous story you might read in a success book or hear from someone who's been through it all. In fact, it started in my small one-bedroom apartment with nothing but a laptop and a deep-seated desire to not work for someone else anymore. At the time, I was working as a software developer for a mid-sized tech company. The work was decent, great pay, good benefits, and a solid team. But I hated it. I hated waking up every morning, commuting to an office I didn't like, working on projects that didn't excite me, and being told when I could take vacation. I was stuck in a cycle, working just enough to get by and waiting for the weekend to come. But I knew I wanted more. I had always been the techie kid, obsessed with gadgets, computers, and figuring out how things worked. By 23, I had built a few small apps that were nothing more than side projects, but they still felt like mini victories. One day, as I was lying in bed after another exhausting workday, I got this wild idea. What if I could make something that actually helps people while building my own thing? What if I didn't need to work for anyone ever again? It was an impulsive thought, but it stuck with me. Fast forward to that night. I stayed up late, researching a niche I'd noticed while scrolling through forums and social media. People were constantly looking for better ways to manage their personal productivity, specifically an app that integrated calendar, to-do lists, and reminders into one simple dashboard. There were plenty of apps out there, but none that seemed to do everything seamlessly. So I decided to build it. I was a software developer, right? I could code this myself. I had the technical skills, but the problem was that I had no idea where to start when it came to actually launching a product, creating a brand, or even marketing it. I was venturing into completely new territory. Over the next few months, I spent almost every free hour learning about product development, UI/UX design, and digital marketing. I watched YouTube tutorials, read articles, and joined online communities of other budding entrepreneurs. I even started attending networking meetups in my city, hoping to find people who could guide me or, at the very least, give me some advice. The first iteration of the app was terrible. I'm not kidding, it was buggy. The interface was clunky, and it didn't solve the problem in a meaningful way. But I had put in enough effort to get it into a workable state. I figured that if I could get even a handful of people to use it and give me feedback, I could improve it over time. I uploaded it to the App Store and sent it to a few friends for testing. The response was mixed. Some loved the concept, but others didn't see any value in it. That feedback was brutal, but I knew it was a necessary part of the process. I didn't have time to wallow in self-pity, so I took their criticism seriously and started working on the next iteration. By this point, I was still working full-time, so balancing the job with my app was a nightmare. I would wake up at 5 a.m. to work on the app before my day started, work all day at the office, then work late into the night, often not getting enough sleep. My social life was non-existent, but I didn't care. I had a mission now, and nothing was going to stop me. Then came the first real breakthrough. After several months of refining the app, I received an email from a blog I had submitted my app to, asking if they could review it. I was floored. An actual review? I had no idea how they even found it. But the review was mostly positive, and within a week, I saw a small uptick in downloads. Nothing huge, but enough to make me feel like maybe, just maybe, this could work. That was when I realized that to make this venture succeed, I had to think beyond just the app. I had to focus on building a brand. I hired a designer to help me create a logo and clean up the app's look. I revamped the website, made it mobile-friendly, and optimized the content to speak directly to my target audience. I learned about SEO and how to drive organic traffic. After months of iteration and improvement, I finally got my first big break. One of the biggest productivity influencers on YouTube mentioned my app in a video. I nearly lost it when I saw it. Within 24 hours, my app had thousands of downloads, and I was scrambling to keep up with the demand. That moment was a game changer. It wasn't just the downloads, it was the validation. People were actually using my product and finding it useful. I was on cloud nine. But, like all entrepreneurs, I soon realized that the hardest part was just beginning. I still had a long way to go. There were bugs to fix, features to add, and customer service issues to address. I decided to quit my job. It wasn't an easy decision. I was leaving behind stability for the unknown. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep juggling a full-time job and my app forever. I took the leap, and for the first time in my life, I was working for myself. The freedom was exhilarating, but it also came with a lot of pressure. The next few months were a blur of late nights, debugging, marketing campaigns, and dealing with the logistical challenges of running a business. I hired a small team, a couple of developers, a marketer, and a customer support rep. We worked tirelessly, growing the product and refining the user experience. Slowly, the app began to gain traction, and the revenue started coming in. But then, something unexpected happened. A competitor, much larger and better funded, launched a similar product. It felt like a gut punch. They had a bigger team, more resources, and a massive marketing budget. I thought for sure I was done. But instead of giving up, I doubled down. I spent even more time on product development, adding features that set my app apart. I focused on what made my app unique: simplicity, user-friendliness, and a personal touch. I also dug into my user base, listening to their feedback and building a community around the app. Gradually, I began to carve out a niche for myself. People who valued the simplicity of my app over the complexity of others stuck with me. And soon enough, I found myself in a much better position than before. The competitor's app didn't resonate with users the way mine did, and over time, I gained a loyal following. Fast forward to today, and my app is one of the leading productivity tools in its category. We've expanded to a full team, and I'm no longer working out of my one-bedroom apartment. But even now, I still remember the sleepless nights, the moments of self-doubt, and the challenges that seemed insurmountable. Entrepreneurship is a roller coaster ride, and it never gets easier, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Looking back, I realized that the most important thing I learned from this journey wasn't about coding or marketing. It was about perseverance, adaptability, and knowing when to take risks. You don't need a perfect plan to get started. You just need to start. So, to anyone reading this who's thinking about starting their own thing, my advice is simple: just go for it. The path won't be easy, but it will be worth it. And don't be afraid to fail, because sometimes failure is just the first step toward success. Keep pushing forward. You've got this. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I decided to take a leap of faith, or as I like to call it, my crazy idea. I was sitting at a cafe in my small hometown, sipping on a lukewarm latte while scrolling through social media. I had recently left my stable job in tech to find myself, a phrase that sounds less poetic when you realize it was more about running away from the 9 to 5 grind than anything else. I had no real plan, just a vague sense that I wasn't doing what I was meant to do. And that's when it hit me. I had been scrolling through yet another influencer's Instagram, and I noticed how they were marketing their personal brand, selling products, and making passive income from it all. It was that moment I decided to enter the world of entrepreneurship, not through some grand vision of changing the world, but out of sheer frustration with my own lack of direction and a small glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could be one of those people living life on their own terms. The first obstacle, as with any dream, was the overwhelming self-doubt. I had no formal training in marketing, branding, or sales. I was an average guy with a degree in computer science and a mild obsession with e-commerce. So where did I start? Google, of course. I binge-read articles, watched endless YouTube videos, and joined a ton of Facebook groups. Some of the advice was helpful, while other pieces seemed to be the same recycled content from a million other wannabe gurus. Regardless, I kept plowing through, ignoring the feeling that I might be chasing a pipe dream. Eventually, I came up with an idea. one that seemed straightforward but was probably more ambitious than I was ready for. I wanted to create a unique line of sustainable, high-quality gym apparel for men. The market was flooded with brands, but I saw an opportunity to cater to a niche: gym-goers who cared about sustainability without sacrificing style or performance. I named the brand EcoFlex and started designing what I thought were the perfect pieces: athletic where that looked good, felt good, and was made from eco-friendly materials. The next step was finding suppliers. This is where things really started to get tricky. I sent dozens of emails to companies in the textile industry, trying to explain my vision. Many didn't reply, some quoted me ridiculous prices, and a few asked for more than I had in my bank account. But, after weeks of rejection, I finally found a manufacturer that seemed like a good fit. They offered organic cotton and recycled polyester blends, which fit perfectly with my eco-friendly brand. I placed my first order, a batch of a few hundred shirts and joggers. I didn't have a big budget, so I ordered the bare minimum, hoping that it would be enough to get the ball rolling. Next came branding and marketing. I knew I needed a slick website, a strong social media presence, and eye-catching content. But again, there was a major problem. I didn't know the first thing about building a website or designing a brand. So, I hired a freelance web designer and a graphic designer to get started. It wasn't cheap, but I knew it was necessary to get the ball rolling. My website went live, and I started posting on Instagram and Facebook, hoping that the right people would take notice. The first few weeks were underwhelming, to say the least. I had a few likes on my posts, a handful of followers, but no sales. It was disheartening. I couldn't understand why the products weren't flying off the shelves. After all, they were eco-friendly, well-designed, and comfortable. What was I missing? Then, one day, I received a message on Instagram from a potential customer asking for a discount. They had seen my post, loved the look of the apparel, but couldn't justify the price. I was taken aback. I had priced the items higher than what I thought the average person would pay, but I knew that the materials were top tier and that people would be willing to pay for quality. That's when I realized that I hadn't properly communicated the value of my brand. I had assumed people would understand the importance of sustainability right away, but most weren't aware of the added costs involved in creating eco-friendly products. I took the feedback seriously and began refining my messaging. I started telling the story behind each piece of clothing, how it was made, why it mattered, and the positive impact it could have on the planet. I began emphasizing that the higher price was a reflection of the ethical practices behind the brand. Slowly, things started to pick up. I had my first sale, then another. It wasn't a flood of sales, but it was enough to show me that people were interested. But then, just as things seemed to be going in the right direction, disaster struck. The pandemic hit. I had just placed my second order with my manufacturer when the world went into lockdown. Factories were shut down, shipping was delayed, and everything came to a halt. I was devastated. My investment was stuck, and I had no idea when I would be able to restock. All of my hard work felt like it was unraveling before my eyes. But I wasn't ready to give up. I had come too far. I began pivoting my business model. Instead of focusing on the physical products, I started offering virtual personal training sessions. It wasn't my original plan, but it was a way to stay relevant and keep the brand in people's minds. I partnered with a few fitness trainers and offered live workouts through Instagram and Facebook, promoting the idea of staying fit while stuck at home. This side hustle helped me stay afloat, and it brought in a small but loyal following. After months of uncertainty, the world slowly started reopening, and I received a shipment of new inventory. I relaunched my brand with renewed vigor, now with a stronger focus on both fitness and sustainability. The marketing efforts I had made during the lockdown began paying off, and people were more open to the idea of supporting brands that aligned with their values. Slowly but surely, EcoFlex began to gain traction. I continued to learn along the way: how to build an email list, how to market on social media, how to understand the nuances of consumer behavior. The journey wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but it was worth it. 3 years later, EcoFlex is no longer just an idea, it's a growing business. I now employ a small team, and we've expanded to include women's apparel as well. The brand's message of sustainability has resonated with a large and loyal customer base, and we've been able to make a positive impact on both the environment and the fitness community. It hasn't been a smooth ride, but looking back, I'm proud of what I've built and how far I've come from that autumn afternoon when I took the leap. There were times I thought about quitting, but I'm glad I didn't. Entrepreneurship is a wild ride, but if you're willing to take the risks, keep learning, and adapt to the challenges, you might just find the success you're looking for. I still don't know if I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, but I'm damn proud of how far I've come. And that's what keeps me going. I grew up in a small town where everything felt like it was stuck in time. The same people, the same routines, and the same businesses that had been around for decades. My family wasn't rich, and we didn't live in a mansion or anything, but we were comfortable. My dad worked in construction, and my mom worked part-time at a local grocery store. I never thought too much about money or success. I just figured I'd get a job like everyone else and live a modest life. That all changed when I turned 18. I was working a dead-end job at a local fast food joint, flipping burgers, and dreaming of something bigger. I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life serving fries and dealing with angry customers. I wanted to create something for myself. But back then, I had no idea what or how. One day, during a particularly slow shift, I overheard two of my coworkers talking about starting their own online business. I didn't know much about the internet, other than it was a place to watch cat videos and maybe find the occasional funny meme, but they seemed so excited. One of them had started a small dropshipping business, and the other was talking about creating a blog about something niche. They spoke with this energy that made my heart race. The idea of creating something from nothing, the idea of being your own boss, it felt like a spark of something bigger than I had ever imagined. That night, I went home and spent hours Googling. What was dropshipping? What was blogging? How do you even start an online business? I quickly found a million different ways to make money online, but none of it seemed real or even possible. There were so many people claiming to have secrets that would make you a millionaire overnight, and I was skeptical. But the more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't some fantasy world. People were actually building businesses, and some were even making a full-time income. I didn't have much money to get started, but I knew I had to try something. So, I bought a cheap online course about dropshipping. It was a $200 course, and honestly, I didn't have the money to spare, but I figured if I could make even a little bit of money, it would be worth it. The course taught me the basics, how to find suppliers, how to set up a website, how to run ads on Facebook. It was a lot to take in, and there were moments when I thought about giving up, but I kept pushing through. I stayed up late after work, watching video tutorials and experimenting with different products. I spent hours designing my website and tweaking my ads. It wasn't glamorous. In fact, it was exhausting. But I loved the process. I loved the idea that I was building something that could potentially change my life. After a few months of learning and testing, I made my first sale. It wasn't much, just a $20 item, but it was enough to get me hooked. That feeling of seeing someone actually buy something from my website was indescribable. I remember jumping up and running around my room like a madman, telling my mom and dad about it. They didn't understand what I was doing, but they could tell I was excited, and they were supportive in their own way. But then, things got difficult. The first few sales were followed by weeks of no sales at all. I couldn't figure out what went wrong. My ads were still running, my website was still live, but nothing was happening. I felt like I had hit a wall and I was so close to giving up. But something inside me told me to keep going, to try something different. So I started studying my competitors more closely. I analyzed their websites, their ads, their products. I joined forums and Facebook groups, asking questions, learning from others who were in the same boat. That's when I realized my mistake. I was focusing too much on products that I thought would sell well, but I wasn't paying attention to what my audience actually wanted. So, I pivoted. I started a new niche, one that I was genuinely interested in and passionate about: fitness. I had always been into fitness, and I thought, why not combine what I love with what I'm trying to build? I spent weeks researching the best fitness products, improving my website, and refining my ad targeting. Slowly but surely, things started to click. I got my first big sale $300. It wasn't life-changing, but it felt like I was finally on the right track. I reinvested that money into my business, running more ads, optimizing my website, and testing different marketing strategies. Over the next few months, I built a small but steady stream of income. It wasn't enough to quit my day job yet, but it was enough to give me the confidence to keep going. Eventually, after a year of trial and error, I had replaced my fast food income with my online business income. I remember the day I quit my job. It was bittersweet. I had been working there for over 2 years, and the people were great, but I knew it was time to move on. I was scared, But I also knew I was ready to take the leap. My business was growing, and it felt like I had finally found something that clicked. From that point on, things really started to take off. I built my business into a six-figure operation over the course of 2 years. It wasn't easy, and there were plenty of late nights, mistakes, and setbacks along the way. But each failure taught me something, and each success pushed me to aim higher. Looking back now, I realized that it wasn't just about the money or the business. It was about the journey, the learning, the growth, the overcoming of obstacles. I was no longer the person who worked a dead-end job and dreamed about something more. I had become the person who built something from the ground up, and that was worth more than any paycheck could ever be. The road to success isn't a straight line, and it doesn't come easily. But if you're willing to put in the work, take risks, and keep learning, you can make it happen. It's not about having a perfect plan or waiting for the right moment. It's about taking that first step, even when you have no idea what you're doing. That's how I went from a fast food job to running a successful online business. And if I can do it, so can you. I never thought my entrepreneurial journey would take the path it did. At 28, I had just left my corporate job, feeling like a failure for not climbing the ladder as fast as others in my company. I had always dreamed of owning my own business, but I never quite had the courage to take the leap. That is, until one night, after yet another soul-crushing day at the office, I found myself on a whim starting something entirely different. I had always been fascinated by the world of digital products, specifically mobile apps. I spent countless hours reading about them, downloading and testing apps, and wondering how some of these people came up with such brilliant ideas. One day, I stumbled upon a random discussion online about a specific problem that many people were facing. It was a simple issue, but it was one that I had never really thought of before. It was related to time management, more specifically, keeping track of daily tasks in a way that didn't feel like a burden. Most task management apps at the time were either too complicated, overly simplistic, or failed to offer a unique solution to people's everyday challenges. That was my aha moment. I knew then that this was my opportunity. But here's the thing, I didn't know anything about coding, design, or even marketing. I was a corporate drone, doing data analysis. I had no clue where to begin, but I was determined to make this work. So, I did what any modern entrepreneur would do. I Googled everything. The first step was to learn about app development. I spent the next couple of months teaching myself the basics of app development and design, watching hours of tutorials, and experimenting with a free app development platform. It was tedious and frustrating at times. My early prototypes were awful. The user interface was clunky, the features barely worked, and the design looked like something from the late 90s. But I didn't care. I kept pushing forward, spending my evenings and weekends building something that, at the time, seemed like a pipe dream. While I was learning to develop, I started reaching out to people I knew for advice. I talked to friends who had experience in product design, others in marketing, and a couple of former colleagues who had started their own businesses. They were all encouraging, but most of them warned me that the road ahead would be long and full of rejection. But I didn't mind. I wasn't doing this to get rich overnight. I was doing it because I wanted something that was mine, something I could build from the ground up. About 6 months into the project, I finally had a working prototype. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. I decided to launch a beta version to get some feedback from real users. I shared the app with about 100 people, mostly friends, family, and acquaintances, and asked them to give me honest feedback. The response was mixed. Some people loved it, others hated it. Some didn't even bother to give it a try. But I took every bit of feedback to heart and made changes accordingly. It wasn't glamorous, and I didn't get a single viral moment, but I slowly started to build a small community around the app. One of the biggest lessons I learned during this phase was the importance of persistence. The feedback was painful at times. Some of it felt like a personal attack, but it helped me improve the app. There were days when I felt like giving up, wondering why I was spending all my free time on something that seemed like a lost cause. But every time I felt that way, I reminded myself that it was better to try and fail than to never try at all. Eventually, after a year of tweaking, testing, and refining, I was ready to officially launch the app. I had no money for paid ads or big marketing campaigns, so I relied on word of mouth and social media. I posted about it on Reddit, shared it with people in online communities who might find it useful, and reached out to influencers who I thought might be interested. It wasn't immediate success, but slowly, over time, the app started gaining traction. But then, disaster struck. About 2 months after the official launch, I woke up one morning to a barrage of emails. The app had crashed. No one could access their accounts, and worse, some people had lost their data. Panic set in. I had worked tirelessly on this app for over a year, and now it looked like it was all about to come crashing down. I spent the next few days in a frantic frenzy, working around the clock to fix the issue. I reached out to a couple of freelance developers to help, and together, we managed to identify the bug that had caused the crash. It wasn't an easy fix, and it took a lot longer than I wanted, but we got it done. During that time, I had to communicate with my users. I made sure to apologize for the issues, kept them updated on the progress, and offered them incentives to come back once the bug was fixed. The transparency and honesty paid off. Despite the initial frustration, many users appreciated that I kept them in the loop and that I was actively working to solve the problem. After the fix, things started to improve again. The app's user base grew, and it started getting more positive reviews. I decided to start charging for premium features, which provided me with a steady income stream. The app was still far from perfect, but it had reached a level of stability and success that I never thought was possible when I first started. Now, 3 years later, my app has a small but loyal user base. It's still not a massive overnight success, but it's mine. It has allowed me to quit my corporate job, and I now work full-time on improving the app and expanding into new areas. I've learned more about business, marketing, and product development than I could have ever imagined. If I could give any advice to aspiring entrepreneurs, it would be this: don't be afraid to start, even if you don't know everything. Don't expect immediate success, and be prepared for a lot of setbacks. Most importantly, be willing to keep going when things get tough. Entrepreneurship isn't a straight path, and it's not always glamorous. But if you stick with it, you can create something truly rewarding. And, most importantly, learn from your mistakes. In the end, that's what will set you apart from the people who give up too soon. I didn't know what I was doing when I started, but now I know that it's the persistence, the grit, and the willingness to learn that makes all the difference. How I went from $200 to a six-figure business in 2 years. Let me take you back to 2019, the year that changed everything for me. I was 24 years old, broke, and trying to figure out how to make it in the world. I had no rich relatives, no fancy degree, and absolutely no idea what I was doing. But what I had was an undying drive to succeed and a deep desire to escape the constant cycle of dead-end jobs. I was working a regular 9-to-5 job in a small tech company. My salary wasn't great, just enough to get by. I remember getting my paycheck each month and thinking, this is all I'll ever have. I couldn't see a way out. I was barely scraping by, with only a few $100s to my name at the end of each month. I used to read stories on Reddit and other entrepreneur forums about people who started with nothing and built empires. I'd look at those stories and think, maybe I can do that too. But then doubt would kick in, and I'd remind myself that most of these people had some sort of advantage that I didn't have. Maybe they had funding or connections or just sheer luck. But in 2019, something clicked. I was sick of feeling stuck, sick of seeing people around me thriving while I felt like I was going nowhere. I didn't have much to lose, so I decided to dive into the unknown. The start? A simple idea. It started with a simple thought. What can I do to make money on the side while still working my job? I knew I needed something low risk, something that could fit around my schedule, and most importantly, something that didn't require much capital to start. At the time, I had a small hobby, graphic design. It wasn't something I was amazing at, but I enjoyed creating logos and simple designs. I figured I could try selling some designs on freelancing platforms like Fiverr and Upwork. If I could make even $100 extra per month, that would help me pay off some bills and at least give me a bit of breathing room. So, I spent the next few weeks getting my profile up and trying to create some designs to showcase. My first gig was designing a logo for a small startup. They paid me $50. It was the most money I'd ever made for a single task outside of my day job, and I was pumped. Sure, it wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the next few months, I continued to take on small freelance projects. Slowly, I improved my skills. I watched YouTube tutorials, read articles, and practiced as much as I could. In a way, my side hustle became an obsession. Every free moment I had, I was working on designs, refining my process, and looking for new clients. The turning point, scaling up by early 2020, I was making a few $100s per month on Fiverr. It wasn't much, but it was enough to convince me that I was onto something. At this point, I realized that if I wanted to really scale up, I would need to go beyond just offering logos and small designs. I started offering branding packages, complete design services that included logos, business cards, website designs, and social media graphics. I raised my prices, and to my surprise, people actually paid them. Slowly but surely, I built a solid reputation on Fiverr. I had regular clients, and my inbox was always full. But I knew I couldn't rely solely on Fiverr. The competition was fierce, and I was starting to feel like I had reached the limit of what I could earn on that platform. I began to branch out, creating my own website and social media profiles to promote my services. I started to network with other designers and entrepreneurs, which led to more referrals and higher-paying clients. I even started to learn about marketing, specifically content marketing and SEO. I began writing blog posts and making video tutorials to help others, which in turn helped my business gain more visibility. But something happened that I didn't expect. As my freelance business grew, I started getting more inquiries for something I had never considered: full-fledged design consultations. Clients wanted not just designs, but advice on how to establish and grow their brands. They wanted someone who could help them build a complete marketing strategy. I didn't have formal marketing experience, but I had done enough research to know a few things. I realized that this was the next step in my entrepreneurial journey. I needed to stop thinking like just a designer and start thinking like a business owner. The pivot. Moving into consulting by late 2020, I made a bold decision. I would pivot my business from freelance design to full-on business consulting. I started offering branding consultations, helping small businesses with everything from their brand identity to their digital marketing strategies. It was a huge leap, but I had learned enough through my own experience to know that this was where the market was heading. At first, it was tough. I didn't have any formal qualifications, and I was competing with seasoned professionals who had years of experience. But I had one thing they didn't: a deep understanding of the challenges that small business owners face when it comes to marketing and branding. I had been there myself. I understood their pain points, and I was willing to go above and beyond to help them succeed. I started getting clients who were willing to pay $1,000 or more for my services. I worked with e-commerce businesses, startups, and even established companies that needed help rebranding. The money started flowing in, and so did the referrals. By early 2021, I had already surpassed my full-time job's salary. I was officially making six figures from my own business. The realization: hard work pays off. It wasn't easy. There were sleepless nights, countless hours of learning, and moments when I doubted myself. But what kept me going was the belief that I could create something bigger than myself, something that would give me the freedom to live life on my terms. Today, I have a full-fledged agency. I don't work as much in the day-to-day operations anymore. Instead, I focus on high-level strategy and building relationships with clients. I have a small team of talented designers and consultants who help execute projects, and I get to choose which clients I work with. The business has allowed me to travel, buy a home, and do things I never thought were possible. I'm no longer stuck in the cycle of living paycheck to paycheck. I'm living life on my own terms, and it feels surreal. Looking back, I'm proud of what I've accomplished. But I also know that my success wasn't just due to skill or talent. It was about showing up every single day, being willing to learn, and never giving up. If I had given up when things got tough, if I had listened to the doubt in my head, I wouldn't be where I am today. I went from having $200 to my name and feeling hopeless to building a business that brings in six figures annually. If I can do it, anyone can. So, if you're reading this and feeling stuck or uncertain, remember, it only takes one idea, one decision, and a lot of hard work to change your life. You just have to take that first step. Keep going. You've got this. When I started my business, I never imagined how much it would change my life. Growing up, I was the kid who never really had a clear idea of what I wanted to do. I wasn't one of those kids who built a lemonade stand and sold it for a profit, nor did I have an aha moment when I realized I wanted to be an entrepreneur. In fact, I barely knew what an entrepreneur even was. I just wanted to get through high school and eventually land a decent job that paid the bills. But that's not the path I ended up on. It all began with a broken phone. I was in college, living in a cramped dorm, when I dropped my phone in the hallway one night after returning from a late class. The screen shattered completely, and I could barely make out anything on the display. I freaked out. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This phone was my lifeline. It had all my notes for my classes, contacts for networking, and most importantly, it had my calendar for upcoming exams. I didn't have the money to replace it, and I definitely didn't have enough to pay for a pricey repair service. I spent a couple of hours Googling how to fix it myself, and after watching some tutorials on YouTube, I decided to take the plunge. Armed with a screwdriver set I'd bought from Amazon for $20, I took apart the phone. It took me a few tries, but I got the screen replaced. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. It was at that moment I thought, hey, if I can do this, maybe others would pay me to fix their phones too. At the time, I had no idea what I was getting into. I wasn't a tech wizard by any means. I just liked fixing things when they broke. But that simple fix was my first step toward entrepreneurship. I started by offering my services to friends. I charged them a small fee, much less than what repair shops would charge. Word spread quickly, and soon I had people from outside my circle asking for repairs. I had never thought about running a business before, but this little side hustle started turning a profit. I was working late into the night, fixing phones in my dorm room, while juggling classes and assignments. The extra income was nice, but I had no clue how to scale this into something bigger. I went online and did a lot of research. I learned about the business side of things, how to set up a simple website, how to find suppliers for parts, and how to advertise myself on social media. It didn't take long for me to realize that I could turn this into something much larger. What started as a way to fix my own phone became the foundation for my first business venture. A year into my repairs business, I finally decided to take a leap and go beyond just offering services. I wanted to make the jump from being a one-person show to opening a physical repair shop. I took out a loan from the bank and used most of my savings to rent a small storefront in a strip mall near a university campus. The location was perfect. There were hundreds of students with broken phones passing by every day. Opening the store wasn't easy. I faced a mountain of challenges: hiring employees, buying equipment, creating inventory, and figuring out how to market to a larger audience. I spent countless sleepless nights building my website, running Facebook ads, and even making flyers to hand out on campus. But the hardest part? Figuring out how to manage cash flow. I was constantly worried that I wasn't going to make enough money to cover expenses. The first few months were tough. I barely made enough to cover rent, employee salaries, and supplies. But slowly, the business started to pick up. People were coming in for repairs, and word of mouth was spreading. I invested more time and money into my online presence, offering discounts, running promotions, and even launching a mobile repair service where I'd go directly to people's homes to fix their devices. One of the biggest breakthroughs for the business came when I realized that I wasn't just selling phone repairs, I was selling convenience. Students didn't want to spend hours waiting for their phones to be repaired at a traditional service center. They wanted fast, affordable solutions that worked on their schedule. By offering walk-in repairs, same-day service, and home delivery options, I found a unique selling point that made me stand out from the competition. Eventually, the phone repair business became profitable, and I started to expand. I opened a second location in another part of the city, and then a third. I hired more employees, and I created an online store to sell phone accessories and replacement parts. But as the business grew, I realized that I had to evolve even further if I wanted to stay competitive. The tech world was changing fast. New phones were being released every year, and the repair market was becoming more saturated. I needed to diversify. One of the best decisions I made was to offer tech support services, helping people troubleshoot their laptops, software issues, and even setting up home offices. It was a natural extension of the business and brought in a new stream of customers. But like any business owner, I faced setbacks. The biggest challenge came when one of my stores was burglarized. The thief managed to break in and steal thousands of dollars worth of phones and equipment. I was devastated. The insurance claim process took months, and during that time, I had to scramble to keep the business afloat. I learned the importance of having proper insurance and security systems in place. It was a painful lesson, but it forced me to reevaluate the way I operated. Through all the ups and downs, I kept my focus on what had made my business successful in the first place: providing value to customers. Whether it was offering fast service, affordable prices, or simply a friendly face when they walked in, I always tried to put people first. And in doing so, I built a loyal customer base that kept coming back, even when competitors tried to steal away business. Fast forward to today, and my business has grown into something I never thought possible. What started as a college side hustle repairing broken phones has turned into a thriving tech repair company with multiple locations, a full-service website, and a dedicated team of employees. I'm now working on expanding into the corporate space, offering large-scale repair contracts to businesses with fleets of mobile devices. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at how clueless I was when I first started. I didn't know the first thing about running a business, but I learned as I went. I failed many times, made mistakes, and dealt with setbacks that made me question whether I was cut out for this at all. But I also learned that the key to success isn't about being perfect. It's about adapting, staying persistent, and always looking for ways to add value to your customers. If there's one thing I've learned along the way, it's that the entrepreneurial journey is never a straight line. There are plenty of bumps, twists, and turns, but if you keep your head up and keep moving forward, you'll get there eventually. It's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. And for me, I'm just getting started. I never thought I'd be here, sitting in this fancy office with glass walls that overlook the city. Just a few years ago, I was living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. But here's the thing. The journey to get to this point wasn't about having a big idea or being in the right place at the right time. It was about sticking with it when everything felt like it was falling apart. Let me rewind a bit. My name's Adam, and I grew up in a small town where most people didn't expect much out of anyone. My parents worked hard to keep the bills paid, but there was never any extra. We didn't have a lot, but we had each other. I wasn't really great at school, but I was good at figuring things out on my own. That kind of mentality served me well later on. After high school, I didn't go to college. I know, that's probably the worst decision you can make if you want to be successful, but hear me out. I didn't have the money for it, and I wasn't interested in pursuing something I wasn't passionate about. Instead, I took on a series of odd jobs: construction, bartending, working at a local store. Each job taught me something different, and through it all, I kept telling myself that one day I'd find the thing I was meant to do. That thing didn't come until I was in my mid-20s. I had just quit my bartending job because I realized I was spending more time wiping down counters than doing something that could change my life. I was desperate for something that felt like it had potential, and that's when I stumbled onto e-commerce. The whole concept of selling things online fascinated me. The idea that anyone, anywhere, could start a business with a laptop and an internet connection felt like magic. So I jumped in headfirst. I bought a domain name, set up a Shopify store, and started selling random products I found on Alibaba. I didn't know much about online marketing or branding, but I had a lot of hustle. My first month, I made $300. It wasn't much, but it was something. And I knew it could be more. I spent hours researching, reading blogs, watching YouTube videos, and listening to podcasts. I started learning about Facebook ads, SEO, and email marketing. But there was one big problem. I had zero money to invest. Every dollar I earned from my side gigs went straight to bills, leaving me with almost nothing to reinvest into the business. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. I used every free tool I could find and even reached out to some entrepreneurs I admired, hoping to get advice. To my surprise, some of them actually responded. One guy, who had built a multi-million-dollar company selling fashion accessories online, shared his story with me and gave me some pointers. He told me that the key to success wasn't in finding the perfect product, it was in learning how to market it effectively. That conversation changed everything for me. I realized that the product itself didn't matter as much as I thought. The real magic was in the marketing. So, I spent the next few months honing my skills, testing different ad creatives, running small campaigns, and tweaking things until something finally clicked. One night, around 3 a.m., I checked my phone and saw a notification that a product I had been testing for weeks had made a sale. It wasn't just one sale, it was 10. And then 20. The next day, it was 50. I remember pacing around my tiny apartment in disbelief. I had finally figured it out. Over the next few months, I scaled up. I reinvested every penny back into ads, refined my product offerings, and built a brand around a specific niche. Slowly but surely, my revenue grew. I remember the first time I hit $1,000 in a single day of sales. I felt like I was on top of the world. But just as things were looking up, life threw me a curveball. I was robbed. My apartment was broken into, and all my equipment, my laptop, my phone, the hard drive with all my business files, was gone. Everything I had worked for, in an instant, was wiped out. I was devastated, but I couldn't quit. I didn't have a choice. So I borrowed a friend's laptop, called my supplier to make sure I could still fulfill my orders, and got to work. I was literally working out of a coffee shop for weeks, rebuilding everything from the ground up. I still remember sitting there, typing on a tiny keyboard, feeling like the universe was testing me. That was the turning point. I realized that no matter how bad things got, if I kept going, I could rebuild. And I did. It took months, but I got back to where I was before the robbery, and then I surpassed it. Eventually, I was making 6 figures in revenue, and that was when I decided to scale beyond just myself. I hired my first employee, a graphic designer, to help with the growing workload. We worked out of a small co-working space, and I focused on building systems and processes that could support more growth. We expanded our product line, increased our advertising spend, and started exploring international markets. Fast forward a couple of years, and things really started to take off. My company had grown into a full-fledged e-commerce brand with a team of 15 people. We were selling in over 20 countries, and I was finally in a position to take a step back and look at what I had built. The key takeaway from this entire journey? Persistence. There were countless times when I thought about giving up, when the money was tight, when I faced setbacks, when I felt like I was drowning in uncertainty. But in the end, persistence paid off. I had no magic formula, no secret sauce. It was just about showing up every day, learning from my mistakes, and never letting failure stop me. And now, looking back at everything from working minimum wage jobs to building a 7-figure company, I can't believe how far I've come. It hasn't been easy, and it's definitely not a glamorous journey. But it's mine, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. I'll keep pushing forward, no matter what. Because if I've learned anything from this experience, it's that success doesn't happen overnight. It's the result of years of hard work, persistence, and the courage to keep going when everyone else is ready to quit. To anyone out there thinking about starting their own business or pursuing their dreams, I have one piece of advice. Don't give up. No matter how hard it gets, no matter how many obstacles you face, keep going. The best part of the journey is not the destination, but the person you become along the way. You've got this. So here's my story of how I started my business, struggled like hell, and somehow ended up in a place I never thought was possible. This all started about 5 years ago when I was stuck in a job that drained the life out of me. I was working as a project manager for a medium-sized construction company. The hours were long, the pay was okay, and I had decent benefits, but I hated it. I had no passion for construction, and I felt like I was just going through the motions. Every day felt like a repeat of the last, and I started to lose the spark that once made me excited to work. It wasn't just the work that got to me, though. The office culture was toxic. There was constant drama, backstabbing, and the management was as out of touch as you could imagine. I remember one meeting where the CEO spent 45 minutes talking about how they wanted to improve synergy without any real plans or ideas. My colleagues and I would sit there, exchanging glances, wondering what was happening to the company. I knew something had to change, but I wasn't sure what. Then, one day, while scrolling through Reddit, of course, I came across a post in the entrepreneur subreddit that completely changed my perspective. Someone was talking about the power of starting a business online and how they made a living doing something they loved. The idea seemed so out of reach, but at the same time, it sparked something in me. Could I do this? Could I really start my own business, escape the cubicle, and be my own boss? It felt like a crazy idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I had always been the techie person in my social circles. I built my own computer, loved tinkering with websites, and I spent countless hours watching YouTube videos on how to build an online presence. But I was scared. What if I failed? What if I lost everything? But something inside me clicked. I had nothing to lose. At the time, I was in my late 20s, no family to support, no mortgage. The worst-case scenario was that I'd fail and go back to a regular job, right? So I started doing some research. I dove into everything I could find about online businesses, from e-commerce to affiliate marketing to SaaS startups. I even took a few online courses about digital marketing, SEO, and website building. The more I learned, the more I realized that this was possible. I just had to make the leap. The first step was figuring out what kind of business I wanted to start. I didn't want to just start a random e-commerce store because it didn't feel personal. I wanted something that would tap into my interests and skills, something that would keep me engaged long-term. After months of trial and error, I decided to create a website that offered web design services for small businesses. I knew I had the skills to create simple, beautiful websites, and I was sure there was a market for it. Small businesses often don't have the budget for large agencies, but they still need a professional online presence. At first, things didn't go smoothly. I built a website, set up social media pages, and started advertising my services. The problem? I didn't know how to market myself. I had no clients, and my website was just another drop in the ocean of the internet. My first month, I made $0. It was demoralizing. I spent every evening researching better marketing strategies, tweaking my website, trying to learn the ins and outs of SEO and social media ads. But nothing worked. One of the worst moments was when I paid for my first Facebook ad campaign. I had spent $200, which was a huge chunk of my savings at the time, and got absolutely no return on it. I was so close to throwing in the towel. But then I remembered something I had read in a Reddit post. Most businesses fail because people quit too soon. I figured I'd give it one more try. I asked some friends for referrals and built a portfolio of work with the few small businesses I could get to trust me. Slowly, but surely, things started to pick up. I invested in learning about sales funnels and email marketing, which turned out to be game changers. I started getting a steady stream of leads, and while I was still working full-time at the construction company, I was slowly building up a client base. But it wasn't easy. I worked nights, weekends, any free moment I had. It was exhausting. There were so many times I doubted myself and wondered if it was all worth it. But I kept at it, and eventually I was able to quit my day job. The moment I handed in my resignation letter was surreal. I felt a mix of excitement and fear, but deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. Over the next year, I continued to grow the business. I started outsourcing some of the work to freelance designers and developers, which freed up my time to focus on scaling the company. I worked on refining my sales process and customer experience, and before I knew it, I had a team of 5 people. We were designing websites, running SEO campaigns, and helping small businesses build their online presence. The business was profitable, and I was finally doing something I loved. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing. As the business grew, so did the challenges. I had to learn how to manage a team, deal with difficult clients, and make tough financial decisions. There were months where cash flow was tight, and I had to dig into my personal savings to cover expenses. There were times when clients would back out of contracts or ask for revisions that would eat into my margins. But I learned to be resilient. I learned how to negotiate better, how to set boundaries, and how to value my work. After about 3 years of steady growth, I hit a turning point. I realized that while the business was doing well, it wasn't scalable in the way I had envisioned. The market was becoming saturated, and I couldn't keep up with the increasing demand without sacrificing quality. That's when I made the decision to pivot. I started developing a SaaS product aimed at helping small business owners create their own websites quickly and easily without needing technical knowledge. I knew that this would allow me to reach more people and provide a more scalable solution. The pivot wasn't easy. We had to completely change our business model, and there were a lot of setbacks along the way. But after a lot of hard work, we launched the product, and it took off. We're now serving hundreds of clients, and the business is more profitable than ever. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. There were so many times I wanted to quit, so many moments of doubt and failure. But the one thing I learned through all of this is that persistence and learning are everything. There are no shortcuts. There's no magic formula for success. It's about showing up every day, making mistakes, and learning from them. And when you finally make it, you look back and realize that every step of the journey, even the hard ones, were worth it. I've always been the kind of person who hated working for others. Don't get me wrong, I've had my fair share of jobs, but the thought of being stuck in a 9-to-5 grind for the rest of my life never sat right with me. I wasn't born into wealth or anything, so I knew that building something for myself was the only way to get out of the rat race. This is the story of how I went from a broke college student with big dreams to running a successful business, and all the failures and lessons I learned along the way. It all started when I was in college. I wasn't particularly good at anything, no outstanding grades, no special talents, but I had a strong desire to get out of debt and build something of my own. I had a few side gigs here and there, tutoring, dog walking, freelance writing, but nothing ever really clicked. During my sophomore year, I took a business class as an elective, and something about it sparked a fire in me. I began devouring books and podcasts about entrepreneurship, business strategies, and mindset. I spent countless nights on Reddit, reading about people starting businesses from scratch, with no funding, no experience, and somehow making it work. I was amazed by the stories of people who had nothing but passion and grit, yet they managed to create something profitable. But there was one thing I quickly realized: there's no shortcut. It's not just about hustle culture or working long hours. It's about strategy, learning from failures, and being willing to pivot when things aren't working. That's the part most people don't talk about. Around the end of my junior year, I decided to start my own business. The idea came to me after months of pondering what niche I could enter. I had always loved fitness, but I wasn't in perfect shape. I was average, but I liked the idea of helping others. The idea I settled on was fitness coaching, but with a twist, offering personalized meal and workout plans, combined with lifestyle coaching that also included mindset training. My thinking was that fitness wasn't just about working out, it was about creating a whole lifestyle. So, I took a deep breath, created a website, and started marketing myself on social media. I had no clients and no reputation, but I thought, what do I have to lose? I started by offering free sessions to friends and family in exchange for testimonials and social media shoutouts. It wasn't glamorous, and at first, the results were disappointing. I didn't get any paying clients, and the few people I worked with didn't seem to take it seriously. I realized quickly that I wasn't just selling a service, I was selling trust. People didn't want to hand over their hard-earned money to a 22-year-old kid with no credibility. I pivoted. Instead of trying to directly sell my services, I decided to focus on building an audience. I started creating content, fitness tips, motivational posts, and behind-the-scenes glimpses into my life. It was slow at first. My followers grew by a few here and there. But I stuck with it. I spent hours writing blog posts, recording YouTube videos, and posting regularly on Instagram. I knew that if I could just get enough people to follow me, I could convert some of them into paying clients. Fast forward to my senior year, and I had just hit 500 followers on Instagram. It wasn't much, but it was something. I'd been consistent for almost a year, and I'd picked up a few paying clients here and there. I was making enough to cover my rent, but it wasn't enough to quit my part-time job. Still, I kept pushing forward, and that's when something amazing happened. One of my followers, a woman named Rachel, reached out to me. She said she loved my content and was interested in working with me. At this point, I had only worked with a handful of people, so I was ecstatic. I immediately jumped on the phone with her, and we discussed her goals and the struggles she was facing with her fitness journey. It was clear that she was ready to invest in herself, and I was ready to help her. We agreed on a pricing plan, and she became my first real client. Rachel's success story became my key to growth. She crushed her goals, posting about our work together on her social media. Soon, other people started reaching out to me, asking if I could work with them too. This was my break. Over the next few months, I refined my services, offered different packages, and put together a more professional brand. I hired a web designer to create a polished website, and I invested in Facebook ads. But even then, things weren't all smooth sailing. I faced one of the hardest lessons I've ever learned. Cash flow is everything. At one point, I had more clients than I could handle, but I wasn't managing my cash flow properly. I was spending money on ads, marketing, and other expenses faster than I was bringing in revenue. I didn't realize how important it was to have a financial cushion until I was running on fumes. I had to scramble to figure out how to balance marketing expenses, client payments, and my personal living costs. After a lot of trial and error, I finally got the hang of managing my finances. I implemented a monthly budget, saved a portion of my income for taxes, and learned to track every penny. I also realized the importance of keeping a clear distinction between business expenses and personal expenses. That was a game changer for me. Around the time I graduated, I had enough clients to make the business a full-time gig. I was making a steady income, but I still wasn't where I wanted to be. I started hiring part-time coaches to help me manage my clients, and I slowly scaled up. However, with success came more challenges. Clients were happy, but I was starting to feel the pressure. The demands of running a business were overwhelming, and I felt like I was juggling too many things at once. I wasn't just coaching anymore. I was doing marketing, customer service, accounting, and operations. I reached a point where I realized I needed help, so I hired a business coach. This was one of the best decisions I ever made. She helped me streamline my processes, prioritize what mattered, and get out of my own way. With her guidance, I learned how to scale my business sustainably. I also learned the importance of delegation. I hired a virtual assistant and a part-time social media manager, which freed me up to focus on what I did best, coaching. Fast forward to today, and my business is thriving. I've expanded into group coaching programs, created digital products, and even launched a podcast. I have a team that supports me, and I'm living the life I always dreamed of. But here's the kicker. I didn't do it alone. I had to lean on mentors, my clients, and my own tenacity to get here. I failed a lot. I made mistakes that cost me money. There were days when I wanted to quit and go back to the comfort of a traditional job. But every time I hit a wall, I found a way over it. And the most important thing I learned? Entrepreneurship isn't a straight path. It's a constant journey of growth, failure, and reinvention. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, just know that it's not going to be easy. But if you're passionate, willing to learn from your mistakes, and never give up, you'll be amazed at what you can achieve. The only real failure is quitting. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.